Abraham is not an example of perfect faith. After God told him to separate from his father, it took him years to do that. For safety, he told his wife Sarah to lie and say that she was his sister. God told him that his wife Sarah was going to have a son, and when Sarah failed to conceive, Abraham impregnated her maidservant. Despite all this, God remained faithful to Abraham and Sarah, and Isaac was born in their old age. Now, God has brought Abraham to the point where he must give priority to either his family or his faith. In essence, God says to Abraham, take your only son, your only heir. In ancient days, in essence, take your social security, Abraham, the one you love, the one you have waited on so long, the miracle child, and go offer him as a burnt offering. As parents, we are repulsed at the thought of sacrificing our child, but remember, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. God did not require Abraham to do anything that he would not do later. The command to Abraham foreshadows what he would do for us centuries later on Calvary. Imagine being Abraham trying to sleep the night before leaving. God had clearly commanded him to sacrifice Isaac. In obedience, Abraham rose early in the morning. He saddled his donkey and took two of his young men with him and Isaac with wood for the burnt offering. Abraham went to the place God directed. After a heartbreaking 3-day journey, the mountain for the sacrifice was in view. At this point, Abraham left his servants behind and went on alone with Isaac. Abraham still believed that God would provide, and he had hope. Note his words to his servants. He says, and the boy and I go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back. As the two alone climbed the mountain to the place of sacrifice, Isaac put a question to his father, which must have broken his heart. Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham's answer is vague but hopeful, saying, God will provide for himself the lamb. Each step, Abraham must have hoped for an alternative course. He reached the place, he built the altar, and arranged the wood. There was nothing left but to bind Isaac, place him on the wood, and plunge the knife into his son's heart. When the knife was lifted high, glistening in the sun, God restrained Abraham from offering his son. An angel of the Lord called him from heaven, saying, Here I am. Do not stretch out your hands against the lad and do nothing to him, for now I know you fear God. Abraham had passed the test, but please note, at this point of total obedience, God did not halt the act of sacrifice. He provided a ram as a substitute for the sacrifice. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him, right behind him, a ram was caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him for the burnt offering in the place of his son. And Abraham called the place, The Lord will provide, as is said to this very day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. I have two colleagues who have children who went to a far off land where Christians are persecuted and punished for just having a Bible. They were there to be missionaries, but they couldn't email back and tell their story. They could only write limited letters with cryptic notes. There were no phone calls. Everything they did had to be secretive. Can you imagine what was going through their mind when they were told these kinds of conditions, and yet they were sending their child, the one they loved, and they wanted to say, no, don't go. But they realized the child was only doing that which they taught. That child was exhibiting the faith that God will provide. And so they had to gird up that same faith. For modern Christians, we sometimes in our daily lives have to face the threats that challenge our faith and that test our resolve to Christian principles. We, in essence, have to choose whether our Christian principles are more important, take more priority over the responsibilities we have to family, over the convenience that we sometimes enjoy. There are times when lying is the easiest way and the truth would cost us too much. There are times when darkness falls and we are alone with the lingering itch within, and scratching it would be so satisfying. There are times when rage envelops our heart and anger courses through our tongues, and vengeance would feel more like yours and not the Lord's. Like Abraham walking up that mountain, we must walk on faith, even when there is no evidence that we will succeed. And there is no evidence that we will ever be satisfied by this action, when there is no evidence that we will ever feel vindicated. Faith dictates that we must still walk out knowing that God will provide and that we serve an awesome God. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week. Bye.